You unlock this door with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of sound. A dimension of sight. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. You've just crossed over into the Twilight Zone.
Picture, if you will, a group of suntan vacationers seeking a place to stay in the dark corners of Hollywood. Enter an abandoned hotel whose backstory is that of a nightmarish mystery. What these unsuspecting guests don't know is that the hotel's only working elevator is unlike any ordinary one they know. Instead, the elevator they're about to board is a direct passageway to the Twilight Zone. Frightening, anxiety-provoking, and simply foreboding, the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror is often earmarked as one of Disney's most beloved attractions. The eerie atmosphere, interpolating theme, attention to detail, and gravity-defying thrills all work in tandem to provide a resounding reason for that claim. Everything that the Disney theme parks are known for is taken quite literally to a whole other dimension with this towering attraction. The time is now as we step into the fifth dimension and learn the strange origins of the Tower of Terror. Before we can check into the Hollywood Tower Hotel, we must first take a step into the Disney archives to uncover how the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror came to be. In the early 1990s, as the Walt Disney Company was in the midst of creating Euro Disney just outside of Paris, Walt Disney Imagineering hatched an idea for the park's Discoveryland section. The idea was Discovery Mountain, a collection of Jules Verne-inspired attractions that would feature a free-fall attraction based on Journey to the Center of the Earth. However, after the park's disastrous opening in 1992, the budget for Discovery Mountain was slashed, leaving only enough for the park's version of Space Mountain. The idea of a free-fall attraction in the Paris park was put to rest. Meanwhile, at Walt Disney World in Florida, the resort's newest park was on the verge of a much-needed shot of adrenaline. Themed to show business during the golden age of Hollywood, the Disney MGM Studios had opened in 1989 to a positive welcome and high attendance numbers. Although the park had received a far greater reception than Euro Disney would, CEO Michael Eisner was now feeling uneasy after the Paris debacle. Aside from the Great Movie Ride and Star Tours, the park had the fewest ride experiences in any Disney park. Additionally, Eisner began to feel the pressure from the nearby Universal Studios Florida theme park that had opened only a year after Disney's Studio Park. Eisner's biggest concern with the newest neighbor in town was that Universal had a growing arsenal of thrilling rides that Disney was lacking at their studio park. Still reeling from Euro Disney's failure, Eisner needed to ensure that the Disney MGM Studios would be seen as a surefire success in the eyes of the public and within the Walt Disney Company. With the undeniable consensus that the park needed to expand, Disney greenlit Sunset Boulevard, a new area that would grow the park's Hollywood theme and improve the park's low attraction roster. The attractions that were to populate this new land came on and off the Blue Sky drawing board. Dick Tracy's Crime Stoppers was scrapped because the 1990 feature film had flopped, and Roger Rabbit's Hollywoodland was stuck in development hell. While the Imagineers tinkered with their thoughts, Eisner was not shy to look elsewhere for inspiration. Michael Eisner was no stranger of stepping outside the Mouse House every once in a while to try and expand the theme park's sandbox. He had already struck a deal with George Lucas a few years prior to bring Star Wars and Indiana Jones into the parks, as well as nabbing the rights to the MGM library and name for the studio's park itself. So, it was no real surprise once he brought in filmmaker Mel Brooks into the Disney fold. Initially, Eisner was interested in convincing Brooks to produce his films in the park's backlot. However, when Brooks heard about the Imagineering team's offhand comment for a comedy horror attraction for Sunset Boulevard, he quickly suggested the idea of a Bavarian village called Castle Young Frankenstein, which would be based off his own 1974 film, Young Frankenstein. Other ideas that floated around included a Vincent Price narrated ghost tour and an attraction based on the works of author Stephen King. One of these ideas, headlined by Bob Weiss, was the concept of a classic whodunit murder mystery inside a decrepit 1930s-era hotel. Named the Hollywood Horror Hotel, guests would enter the dilapidated building and undergo a scavenger hunt to find the culprit responsible. Eisner became more intrigued with the horror aspect of the hotel project and began to lose interest in the lighter comedy that Brooks's ideas brought. Since the idea had distanced itself from the original vision, Brooks left the project. With Brooks out of the picture, the Imagineers dug up the old plans for the abandoned freefall attraction from Paris and settled on the idea of an elevator breaking from its shaft and moving throughout the corridors of a haunted hotel. Eisner, though, still believed that the attraction should have a tie-in with an existing well-known property. The Imagineers finally settled on The Twilight Zone, an anthology series created by Rod Serling that aired on CBS from 1959 to 1964. A classic staple in American television, the series featured original stories centered on everyday characters in unusual situations, that often brought with it unexpected twists and conclusions. This narrative framing allowed Disney to tell their own original story within the confines of the Twilight Zone. The Imagineers even mused that the attraction would finally be able to take guests to the elusive fifth dimension that Serling mentioned in every episode opening. The Imagineers worked on weaving the series' connection to the attraction's story by watching all 156 episodes of The Twilight Zone twice to properly match the exact tonal atmosphere Serling established in each episode. The Imagineers' agreed upon idea involved guests entering the abandoned hotel and essentially walking into a lost episode of The Twilight Zone. The storyline was finalized into this.
Hollywood, 1939. Amid the glitz and the glitter of a bustling young movie town at the height of its golden age, the Hollywood Tower Hotel was a star in its own right, a beacon for the show business elite. Now, something is about to happen that will change all that.
Disney consulted with the Otis Elevator Company to build a new type of elevator that would actually feel like a freefall. An ironic request to a company that had spent the past century making elevators feel like anything but that. The fifth dimension scene, however, meant that the elevator vehicle would have to do more than just go up and down. It would have to leave the elevator shaft and move horizontally. Therefore, the ride was equipped with an improved form of technology that Disney had relied on before: the Autonomous Guided Vehicle, or AGV. The vehicle's motion relies on the communication between a sensor plate fastened on the bottom of the vehicle and a wire built into the floor. The wire sends computer signals to the vehicle and tells it direction and speed. The free-falling portion of the ride is handled by the Vertical Vehicle Conveyance, or VVC. The VVC is designed to generate enough torque to propel the elevator car up and down with its own force instead of just pulling the vehicle up and letting go like traditional drop towers do. In other words, guests don't fall in the Tower of Terror, they get pulled down, resulting in a drop that's truly faster than gravity itself. Once internal designs were completed, construction began on the 199-foot tall tower. Why not an even 200? Well, if it had been built at a height of 200 feet or taller, it would have been affixed with a blinking red aircraft warning light at the top. The Imagineers believed the modern-day safety fixture would look out of place for a 1930s-era hotel, and therefore built the tower 1 foot below the height restriction. This rule of thumb is true for the heights of other structures at Walt Disney World, such as Cinderella Castle and Expedition Everest. Another factor the Imagineers had to take under consideration with the tower's height was its proximity to Epcot. The building's architecture, partly modeled by the real Hollywood Tower in Los Angeles, California, was designed as neo-Mediterranean with some Spanish Gothic, allowing it to blend in seamlessly with the rest of the Morocco Pavilion at Epcot's World Showcase just a few miles away. The most perplexing component of the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror is the unlikely inclusion of deceased series creator and host Rod Serling. Serling appears throughout the attraction, uttering lines of dialogue never once referenced in the series. To achieve this effect, Disney held hundreds of auditions for anyone able to pull off an authentic recreation of Serling's distinct voice. Voice artist Mark Silverman was selected in the role with final approval by Rod Serling's widow, Carol. With a voice ready to supply Serling's every cryptic line of dialogue, there was now the matter of physically putting the suit and tie host into the pre-show, where Serling recounts the hotel's background events. The Imagineers took the opening footage from the 1961 episode It's a Good Life and composited Serling out of the original footage and into their own backdrop.
Tonight's story on the Twilight Zone is somewhat unique and calls for a different kind of introduction. This, as you may recognize, is a map of the United States.
Through some clever audio dubbing and editing, the Imagineers repurposed the footage with Mark Silverman's dialogue. The final effect is seamless.
The time is now, on an evening very much like the one we have just witnessed. Tonight's story on the Twilight Zone is somewhat unique and calls for a different kind of introduction. This, as you may recognize, is a maintenance service elevator, still in operation, waiting for you. We invite you, if you dare, to step aboard because in tonight's episode, you are the star. And this elevator travels directly to the Twilight Zone.
The Twilight Zone Tower of Terror debuted at Disney MGM Studios on July 22, 1994, to wide acclaim and received a glowing reception from theme park visitors. The attraction became a significant milestone for Imagineering and went on to become a revered icon of Walt Disney World. Continuing the trend of dismal park performance, Disney was hit with a 1-2 punch of the same variety in the early 2000s. Both Disney's California Adventure and Walt Disney Studios Park in Paris were outright financial and creative failures when they debuted in 2001 and 2002 respectively. At the time, Imagineering was developing a new Frontierland attraction for Disneyland named Geyser Mountain with the same ride system used for Tower of Terror. The mine elevator attraction would travel through a cavernous mountain and then get shot out from underneath the earth by a geyser and ultimately drop back down. Disney, desperate to goose up the neighboring park's sinking attendance, decided to cancel the Frontierland plans and bring over a West Coast version of the Tower of Terror. Redesigned to be more cost-efficient but still retaining its own 1930s Hollywood look, the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror opened at Disney's California Adventure on May 5, 2004. A third version of the tower opened on September 22, 2006 at Tokyo Disney Sea, with a completely different storyline that omitted the Twilight Zone theme. Finally, on December 22, 2007, after a few years of construction delays, the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror came full circle and arrived at the struggling Walt Disney Studios Park in Paris, at the very same resort that had spiritually triggered its birth years before. In 1997, Disney produced a television film based on the attraction's storyline. Tower of Terror was the first Hollywood film to be based on a theme park attraction. In 2002, Imagineers decided to spruce up the original tower in Walt Disney World. Florida's attraction was given a completely randomized drop profile during the drop sequence, replacing the pre-programmed pattern it featured before. Therefore, each ride is now different, not to mention more terrifyingly erratic. In July 2016, Disney announced the tower's closure at Disney California Adventure and its replacement, Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout, based on the Marvel Studios film series. The closure announcement was met with a sharp reaction from within the Disney and theme park community. Nevertheless, despite being a beacon of proper theming at a park that sorely needed such, the attraction at Disney California Adventure took its final drop into the Twilight Zone on January 2, 2017. The tower at the now renamed Disney's Hollywood Studios is located at the terminus of Sunset Boulevard, adjacent to Rock and Roller Coaster starring Aerosmith. Guests walk through an outdoor queue that winds through the hotel's untended gardens and finally leading into the lobby. The hotel's deserted state becomes more apparent here. Objects appear to have been left undisturbed for years, being cloaked in layers of cobwebs and dust. To the careful observer, the lobby is littered with countless references to the Twilight Zone. The cast members, dressed as bellhops, guide guests toward the library, passing a condemned elevator as they walk by. As guests become settled in the library, the television set turns on, and the opening sequence from the television series plays. The hotel's past events are explained in a monologue by Rod Serling. He remarks that the thunderstorm outside the library's window is similar to the one from the night in 1939. He invites the guests to board the maintenance service elevator, which remains the only functioning elevator left in the hotel. The television set then abruptly shuts off. Guests meander through the hotel's basement and boiler room until they finally embark into their elevator car. Once the doors close, the elevator car rises up and opens on one of the hotel's corridors. The thunderstorm causes the lights of the hallway to flicker. The 5 spirits of the lost passengers appear for a moment and suddenly disappear. The corridor darkens into a field of stars, and the window at the far end shatters. The elevator doors close once again and continues ascending. The doors reopen and the elevator car glides horizontally into the 5th dimension. Finally, Serling informs the guests that they have now crossed over into the Twilight Zone. Immediately following Serling's words, the elevator car descends into the drop sequence. The drop sequence lasts roughly a few minutes, with the elevator car undergoing 6 to 8 drops of varying heights. At times, the elevator doors open, revealing the park from above. After the drop sequence is complete, the elevator car begins to make its way back into the basement just as Serling delivers a closing monologue. The elevator doors open for a final time, and the guests are led to the attraction's gift shop. When the attraction was brought to Disney California Adventure and Walt Disney Studios Park, the towers had changes to their exterior and infrastructure. The architecture was remodeled as Pueblo Deco, and the ride's mechanics and functionality were completely overhauled. The Paris Tower was constructed entirely of concrete instead of steel girders used in California and Florida. The second-generation tower has 3 drop shafts and a different operating system between the ride and loading portions. Consequently, the ride scenes had to be changed. These versions of the attraction lack the 5th dimension scene. Instead, there is a new scene where guests see their reflections become distorted in a hallway mirror. The rest of the ride pretty much follows the original attraction's format. The tower at Tokyo Disney Sea, however, underwent even more changes that it became its own unique attraction. For starters, this version is not themed to the Twilight Zone and has no connection to the series or to the Hollywood Tower Hotel, and is simply named Tower of Terror. Instead, this attraction takes place in the Hightower Hotel in early 1900s New York City. Taking on a Moorish revival look, the story has the tower's namesake explorer, Harrison Hightower III, uncovering an idol on an expedition trip. Hightower takes the priceless idol for himself, refusing to believe the idol to be cursed. During a New Year's Eve party where he mocks and defiles the idol, Hightower goes up to his room by himself. While riding the elevator, the idol comes to life and causes the elevator to break from its shaft and plummet to the ground. Hightower and the idol are never seen again. Years later, in 1912, a local restoration company begins to offer tours of the hotel to the public. This is how the park guests get themselves into the hotel. Apart from these changes, the queue and ride are basically the same as the other towers, with the exception of obvious thematic changes to suit the altered storyline. This much is clear. The Tower of Terror, whether it be centered on Rod Serling's television masterpiece or an ancient cursed idol, continues to be as timeless as infinity, conjuring up screams of excitement from petrified guests around the world. Honoring Rod Serling's craft of telling imaginative tales of the Twilight Zone, the attraction stands as a testament to that wondrous land whose boundaries are that of imagination. Submitted for your approval, a hotel from a bygone era, frozen in time, a free-falling elevator with a mind of its own, and a group of oblivious travelers unaware of the dark tale awaiting to be uncovered. Take these facts and figures you have attained and file them appropriately into your mind. You may never know when you might need to use them, the next time you step into the Twilight Zone.